Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited. Today we have a rockin' show for you. I can't even wait till we begin. But first, always first, we have to listen to the music. I'll see you in a second. You're on the Success Secrets for Business, Family, and Life channel. I'm Vickie Helm. This is the Coffee Break Show today, and it's brought to you by Metadime Digital Network. Today, we are on the show, and we have Beverly Behan. First of all, I just want to say welcome to the show for us. Welcome
Thank you.
here.
Thank you very much, Vickie.
And
Thanks for inviting me.
Today on the Coffee Break Show, I see you guys starting to come on. So do me a favor. If you want to be part of the conversation, good morning, Beverly. Yes, that's my better half there. Good morning, Beverly. Thanks for being on, Robin. When we get to the show, put your name down below, be part of the conversation with us, and go ahead and talk. I just want to say that Beverly is the author of something that I think is really profound, really important, and we're going to be talking about that. And the book that she wrote is Becoming a Boardroom Rock Star?
No, Becoming a Boardroom Star. Yeah.
Hold the book up for me.
There we go.
There it is. Nope, put it down. There it is. Becoming a Boardroom Star. Now, I don't know about you, but I've been on boards, and serving on boards is so important. Good morning, MJ. Nice to see you on, my friend. So glad you guys are jumping on. And so what happens is I want to know how you got started in the Becoming a Boardroom Star yourself. Why are boards important? Why did you write this book? So it's like that.
Sure. How I got started, I don't serve on any boards because I consider that a conflict of interest. But I have worked with nearly 200 boards, mostly in the S&P 1500, in the Fortune 500, not only across the United States, but around the world over the last 25 years. My specialty is board effectiveness. And how I got started was when I was in my 30s. I was an impressionable young attorney working at a large airline in Canada that had, now this company no longer exists. This is not Air Canada. This is an airline and a company that's gone. And part of the reason it's gone, in fact, a big reason it's gone, is because of the board. Now,
interesting.
The people on this board were marquee name people, okay? They'd be on the cover of business magazines and things like that. But back in the 1990s, which is when I had this experience, boards were very much a country club. And it really wasn't considered so much a job. It was kind of an honor to be on the board.
That's true.
Okay. And there's a little bit of that mentality still, but I think we've shifted a lot over the last 2 decades since the 20th century, right? Mm-hmm. So what happened to me was, I'm really dating myself, but we went through the first Gulf War, and airlines really suffered because people weren't flying and fuel costs were through the roof. And American carriers all went into Chapter 11. But in Canada, we didn't have that kind of protection. So once you filed for bankruptcy,
interesting,
it was over. So somebody in our airline, a senior executive, came up with the idea to do a wages for stock deal with our unions and also a joint venture with American Airlines. We ended up raising $750 million to save the company. And all of our employees, from our, ramp agents to our pilots, gave a significant portion of their pay to corporate stock. Mm-hmm. And so did the management team. In fact, the CEO, had a big meeting at the hangar and said, I'm taking 20% cut. And all of management took that. The pilots took 18. People were taking significant amount of money. So everybody was happy, right? And I will tell you, Vickie, it was a really electric environment at the time because people were really proud of saving their company. Now, here's what happened. About 4 or 5 months after this great meeting at the hangar where the CEO says he's going to take a pay cut, the proxy circular comes out. And because all of our employees are now shareholders, they read that. And they see that, yes, the CEO's pay is a little bit less, but it doesn't look like 20%. Let me get out my calculator. It's only 4%. What about the 20%? Well, the CEO sends out a missive to everybody and says, oh, well, it's such a difficult time right now that the board gave me a raise. And then they levied the full 20%. Well, that didn't happen to anybody else in the company. So we had, a lot of labor unrest. We had some wildcat strikes at some of the big Canadian airports. And in response, the board then decided to send a letter to the homes of every employee. And these, by the way, are all now shareholders who the board's supposed to be representing. And rather than saying, gee, we're really sorry, this was a bad idea, they said, you employees need to stop criticizing the CEO and be lucky that you have a job.
Wow.
So you can imagine how that played.
Yeah.
Basically, the morale of the company was destroyed. And the CEO at the time became a lightning rod for employee discontent. And finally,
after that,
finally the board says, look, we got to get rid of this guy. And this is an airline. Okay. So who do they hire to be the new CEO? A guy who had run a commercial real estate company. What's that have to do? Well, not too much, except it turns out that commercial real estate company was headquartered in the same office tower as the airline. So maybe the board members, met him in the lobby. They met him in the elevator, wherever it was. Okay. So this further, impacted corporate morale. And, it was a mess. The guy ran the company into the ground, basically. And finally, 2 years later, it was sold at a fire sale price to our rival Air Canada. And about 30 or 40,000 people, a lot of whom were my friends, lost their jobs.
Wow.
And I got interested in boards because
I see that debacle really pushed it. It's interesting because that's a lot of how people end up in their business or serving something when they witness or are party to some sort of debacle that happens, or they got stung and they're like, okay, I've had enough. This is happened in the insurance industry, with big companies taking advantage of little people, and boards now, I think, MJ, you got it right. It's that corporate governance is where it is now. No more gentleman's handshake. And yet, what are boards like now? What do they serve now? I mean, and I also want to say, look, the link right now, and if you're driving in a car and you're listening on Pandora or iHeartRadio or wherever you are, relax. The link to her book is in the feed in the show notes today. So drive safe. You can go ahead and pick up your copy after you arrive safe. But the link is already in there. Robin, thank you for putting that up there. It'll show as a big, long, Amazon link here. But when you go there, just look for the book. The book will be there. Click on the book and you can purchase yours and learn how to be a board star. Go ahead and tell us a little bit more about what is for those people who are not familiar with what boards are, because they just think they're a bunch of, money-sucking, mind-sucking people who get there and take control of something. And they're more like, the Wolf of Wall Street kind of board,
Well, I think it's changed a lot. In the 20th century, which is when I first started working in the boardroom, it was a country club. And that was very much the mentality. And even after I left the airline, I went back into private practice as an attorney, and I was doing corporate finance. I was doing IPOs. I was closing deals. These boards were pretty lackluster. And I was disappointed in that, because to me, the board was where the buck was supposed to stop. If there were problems with management, the board was supposed to be the sober second thought that said, hey, what are we doing? Or why aren't we pursuing this or pursuing that? And people's livelihoods depend on the decisions that are made in the boardroom. Okay. Their livelihoods in terms of employment, their livelihoods in terms of, investing pension funds and, the money they hope to live on in their old age. So what boards do is incredibly important. Their job is basically to oversee management and oversee the company on behalf of the stakeholders, which include the employees and include the people that invest in the company, even the communities in which the company functions or the organization functions. So it's a very important role. And in the 20th century, it was very much a country club. It was considered an honor to be on a board. And we used to have a joke that was like, a board is like the hood ornament on a Mercedes Benz, right? It looks very impressive, but it's functionally useless. Okay.
It's just the brand identity.
That's right. So that all changed with Enron, which happened roughly 20 years ago. Okay.
I remember that though.
Well, that corporate America changed that day. The whole world changed that day. Okay. And because all of a sudden, people were up on Capitol Hill. And people's livelihoods were wiped out. A company was wiped out. Thousands of people were out on the street. And all of a sudden, there was a tremendous regulatory avalanche in terms of the boardroom. And so we've seen a real shift since that time in terms of it less being an honor and more being a really important job. But I do believe in the 20 years I've had the privilege of working in the boardroom that there are still a lot of improvements that can make boards even more effective. And I think we owe that to our businesses. We owe that to our nonprofits. We owe that to the organizations that we might have the privilege of governing.
So it's more like a serving role in that point. Now, let's go down into the deeper part. So when... I want to see how to ask this question, because the when is kind of when, to me, should a business think about having a board if they're, because I have had boards that guided my business, but I'm not a publicly traded company. And I think the power that you just said of the board that's actually there, if it's a good, smart board that is there to serve people, can make a huge difference in a business as it begins to scale out into the 8-9 figure and beyond mark. And if it intends to go public, if it intends that, when's a good time to have a board? And what is it? Maybe 3 things that a board, that when you put the board together, what should it be really focused on other than, other than its possible own agenda? I mean, how do you keep it from not going rogue, your board going rogue? How do you keep it in a healthy way? And when is the time to even begin thinking about, I need to have a board helping me direct my company's growth?
Well, first of all, many boards come into being because you need to have them if you're going to tap into the capital markets. So if you're going to go and, raise money for your business on the NASDAQ or, even one of the smaller stock exchanges, you have to have a board. That's required by law. And similarly for nonprofits, the way they're raising money, they're required by regulation to have a board to oversee the money that they're collecting from their donors. So you're required in doing that. If you're planning, I think it's a great point, Vickie, if you're planning to do an initial public offering or even a SPAC, which is very popular now, right? So you're going to end up with a board. It's a good idea to start forming a board earlier on so that it isn't sort of this, shock of, oh, suddenly we have a board. You've had you've had some experience working with your board prior to the IPO, and it isn't like you're rushing to populate that board either. I see that a lot. I mean, I was just talking to a CEO that I worked with many years ago when he ran another public company. He just went through a SPAC, and just to put all their directors together on a short time horizon was very challenging. So I think laying that up, if that's your plan, there's another sort of animal called an advisory board. And, if you're a smaller company, but you think there might be some value in bringing some really sharp, successful people and having them around you to help guide that, you can have an advisory board. Now, the big difference is you're still making all the decisions. The advisory
more
board,
mentorship with
totally.
the advisory board.
Yeah.
And I have had those, and they have helped me out. And that's interesting because most people think the advisory board is the board. When you're starting out, board vastly different. Two types of boards here.
Absolutely. The advisory board, when you think about a board, the way I think about a board of a public company, or even a large, sizable nonprofit, is there is both a watchdog role, okay, and what I call a sounding board role. And I think good boards play both. So the watchdog role is what we often think about when we think about governance problems, which is that the watchdog director is the one who raises the difficult and challenging issue. Like, for example, let's say you're asking for money for a new product venture, but you analyze that and you say, look, we just don't see the returns in this. We think this product is way off of, where our sales force is. So they ask the tough question. That's a watchdog. Yeah. And they're protecting the company and they're protecting the shareholders by making sure that management isn't going down a strange path.
Yes.
That's really going to create problems for the organization. So that's what a watchdog director does. A sounding board director is really, and some people play both and some type of gravitate to one or the other. A sounding board, they really leverage their expertise and their insights, even their network, to benefit the organization. They provide more guidance and mentorship, right? Yes. And I think in a public company, you have both. When you have an advisory board, they're really not playing that watchdog role. They're really there largely to play that sounding board role. And that can be valuable. And, if you're finding you're not getting a lot of value out of it, you can very easily disband it because you have total control of the organization.
Beautiful. This to me is so interesting because we have a lot of clarity happening, and I see you guys with your statements. I'll be there right in a second, but I see a lot of clarity happening as to how boards serve, what they are. And I love the distinction that she is sharing with us. You can get that in her new book as well, How to Be a Boardroom Star. I want to pop in there and just say lots of directors. This is from MJ. Lots of directors are or were figureheads and did not know much about the business. Now regulations are moving the needle. You have your executive directors and your internal directors. Thank you very much. Dictatorship is now a business. Directorship is now a business. Directorship. I read that totally wrong. I know you're laughing, MJ. Directorship also comes with a vast amount of potential liabilities. And I want to let you know, she is a CEO and retired with decades as a CEO running a pension for a country. She ran it for a country. So this is her boardroom thing. This is something she knows about really well. And I'm glad you're here for the conversation today. If you're driving along and you're thinking, okay, the advisory boards, I love those, but now let's go down to I want to get to the point where when we're talking about boards, serving on boards, because there is a boatload of boards to serve on. What makes a good and powerful board? How do you become a star on a board? Let's talk about the title of your book and let's put that into the conversation today. What are the things that help you become really good on a board?
Well, first of all, there should be some clear nexus between your expertise, your background, and the business or purpose of the organization that you're governing. Okay. So if your expertise is just way out there, okay, like you were a senior executive at a retailer and you're now on the board of an oil platform drilling company, okay, I'm not sure how much you're going to be bringing to the party. I mean, maybe if you were the CFO at the retailer and you understand financial stuff, okay. So I think one thing that makes a boardroom star is somebody who has things in their
Relevancy.
background that's highly relevant to the issues that are going to come on the board table, because then they can chime in, they can challenge management very constructively, and they can guide management by saying, hey, when I was doing this, I noticed this, and have you thought about that? And that's where boards add a lot of value, and that's where a lot of people really are stars. Secondly, I think work ethic, as unglamorous as it is extremely important.
You got that right.
If you come on board of an organization you don't really know much about, let's say, you're a small business owner, you're asked to go on the board of a local bank, okay? Invest the time, even if they have a fairly slipshod orientation program, invest the time to learn about that sector and learn about what's going on in the industry. And that may mean going to the CEO or the executive director and saying, listen, I'd like to spend a little more time with your IT folks or your branding folks or, people that understand the regulatory environment, and make sure you really understand the business. And also work ethic includes keeping up to speed on what's going on, right? Even in a nonprofit, because technically, as a nonprofit, you're competing with other nonprofits in your community.
Yep.
You want to see, let's say it's a college, what's going on in the educational environment. So keeping up to date. And you can really tell when somebody's taken the time, they've read the pre-reading a few days in advance, and they've thought about the issues that are going to be talked about in the boardroom, as opposed to somebody who kind of flipped through it in the Uber on the way to the meeting,
Oh, I was going to make a political joke there, but just
well,
there you go.
There you go. So, but people can tell, like, work ethic is really important, and it may not be glamorous. So, just to give you some ideas on that, a lot of data that I looked at, if you go on the board of a nonprofit, okay, expect to spend between 5 and 10 hours a month on the work of the nonprofit. That's a reasonable, okay. And if you're going to take a leadership role, if you're going to chair a committee on the nonprofit or even chair the board, that's a much more intense time commitment. And that's an expectation. In the public company world, it's roughly 250 hours a year. So just over 20 hours a month is kind of a realistic expectation. And same thing. I mean, if you're going to chair the audit committee or you're going to chair the governance committee or the compensation committee, you're going to spend a lot more time in that leadership role. So you need to kind of be prepared for that and invest that, because it really shows. Yeah, it really shows. Yeah, it really does. And I think also, there's a role model piece to being on a board, right? I mean,
ooh, say more about that. That just is intriguing right there.
Well, I think that the board is often not looked at, as really setting the corporate culture. But in fact, the very tone at the top of any organization is set in the boardroom, because they choose the leader. They choose the CEO or executive director of the organization. They choose the strategy. They oversee very many important decisions and make very many important decisions. And they actually set the tone at the top. And I think you want your board members to reflect that tone at the top. And you want your the people that work in the organization to be proud of the people that are on the board. Okay.
That's right. That's for sure.
And I think that, you asked me earlier, and I apologize because I didn't answer. How did I end up writing Becoming a Boardroom Star? In the last 18 months in particular, we've seen the windows open in terms of the recruitment of diverse directors to an extent we've never seen before. And I think that's a great thing. And I was getting calls from friends of mine who are Black, who are Asian, who are women, who were suddenly being recruited to boards. And they called me, and the question was the same. Everybody asked me the same question, which is, I got on this board. I'm really excited. Love the CEO, love the board. I'm excited. And I want to be really great. I want to hit it out of the park. I want to be a really good director. And I also feel that it's taken us a long time to get to this place. And I think success really is not just populating the board with diverse candidates, which I'm not undermining that. I think that's very important. But 2 years from now, I'd like boards that were hesitant to turn around and say, wow, recruiting some of those people, they're the best directors, and we should have done this like way earlier. And I think that's where, if you look at the boardroom, it's really the power in the boardroom is all about influence and impact. And right. And I think we're going to have true diversity in the boardroom when our board members
I can't wait to see.
Yeah. And I think we're going to really have that when those new board members that are sort of in this cohort that's coming into our boardrooms right now really exerts that kind of influence and impact in the boardroom. So that's why I wrote Becoming a Boardroom Star. Now, it doesn't mean it's just targeted at new directors or, directors that are diversifying the board. It applies to anyone. But I wrote it because of calls I got from friends of mine who were being recruited for those reasons and wanted to do a great job.
God, that is fantastic. And it's inspiring as well, because I look at it right now and I think, and I'm just, guys, I love you. And I want to let you know, guys in the boardroom are great, but I still believe that women are an underserved populace in the boardroom, and that part of the diversity that is coming into a boardroom, I think that inclusivity in that the decision-making and the culture and everything that the board represents now, instead of the good old boys club, it's the good old humankind club. That might be something that's more powerful for me and I can get behind. I want to pop in. MJ, you're just here today, and I'm really digging the fact that you are on with us. Directors have to do their research, and companies have a duty to educate their directors yearly. This is in addition to the cyclical required board meetings. Thank you. Yes, my better half popped on. Yes, work ethic. There seems to be times when the companies need much more time, depth of interaction with the company members and leaders. So what I know about this that I'm learning from you that I think is really exciting, I just want to say a couple of points here. One is what boards do, what they stand for, the culture around them is shifting. And in order to serve better on the board and hit it out of the park and be that way, one of the things you're going to have to do is open up and be one of those people who are self-learners that are, really there researching their industry. You want to have obviously relevancy now when you step into it. One of the best things you can do to up your game as your career is growing is read this book. And will you do me a favor and hold your book up, because I want people to see it.
Thank you.
And
Vickie.
this right here, this Becoming a Boardroom Star, if your career is, if you really love the industry and the career you're at and you're really growing it, you want to become a boardroom star, you want to have the most relevant information you can get on that. And here's this book written by Beverly Behan, and you can get it. We have, Robin, do me a favor and put the link back in. We have it in the thread. If you're driving and you can't see the book cover, no worries. When you get to where you're going, it's in the thread right there. Thank you. And I want to continue the conversation because I want to talk about this. I want to see how deep we can go. I want to talk about, go back to the diversity in the boardroom.
Sure. Can I just say one thing building on what you just said that I think is really important?
Yes.
So, there's another factor here, which is that if you're a senior executive in an organization, let's say you're a chief human resources officer, your chief legal officer, your CFO, you are working often with your board. Okay. That's whether it's a large private company or whether it's, a public company. And, they never train you in MBA school or law school or anywhere else how to work with a board. Okay. You learn to work with a board from watching your boss. And sometimes you do. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you pick up good habits and sometimes you pick up bad habits. And by the way, the board makes decisions about your capability for leadership based on that very narrow window in which they see you working in the boardroom.
Interesting.
And this is an area of professional development for a lot of people. And I am a huge fan of recommending for someone who is sort of in the C-suite, they want to become a CEO, lead a public company, something like that. It's a great experience if your board and your CEO will allow you to sit on another board to get that experience of sitting on the other side of the board table is fantastic. It can really raise your own game in terms of working with your board. And I remember many years ago, I had the privilege of working with Anne Mulcahy when she became the CEO of Xerox. And Anne was never supposed to have been. Sorry, Vickie.
This is so interesting because I was just thinking of Ursula Burns.
Right.
I really like her.
Right. Well, so Anne, I never worked with Ursula Burns, but I worked with Anne shortly after she took over the Xerox board. And Anne was never supposed to have been the CEO of Xerox. Right. It was a guy that had come out of, I think, McKinsey, and they'd brought him over in a staff role. And that didn't work out. And the next thing, she was tapped. Now, one of the things she said is that she was planning to retire, and Paul Sharon, who was the CEO at the time, he had consciously put Anne, helped her get on some other boards because she was going to be leaving Xerox and have a professional career as a director. And she told me that one of the best things that happened to her when she stepped into the role in running Xerox out of a mess was that she'd had the experience of sitting on other boards on the other side of the board table, and she knew how it probably felt to those people. And she really encouraged, as I understand it, Ursula Burns to sit on one or two outside boards before she became
that
the
was my
CEO
point.
of Xerox.
I was going to say, because I just read Ursula Burns' memoir for Xerox that was really good. And she talks about that board thing. And I was interesting that we were on that same wavelength that was there. And I think Ursula Burns, she set the pace for diversity on boards. She was she did some great things, and so did Anne. And Xerox is a great start where women were sitting on boards that were impacting the diversity of the board. I think Xerox led the way there. I think that was they're a great company for that.
Yeah.
I just want to pop over here because MJ is in the conversation today. The movement started NASDAQ mandate one diversity rules requiring companies listed on the U.S. exchange to have at least 2 diverse directors on their board. Isn't that interesting? I mean,
and California as well. I mean, the California rules are even more extensive. So California sort of started it. NASDAQ passed it this year. And then you've got a lot of boards, even NYSE and other companies that don't trade or aren't even impacted, but they know that that's really where society is going. And and so we've seen, Heidrick and Struggles put out a report about 2 weeks ago, and they looked at, recruitment to the S&P 500 over the last 12 months. And it's really showcased a lot of diverse directors coming onto the boards. And so part of the reason I wrote Boardroom Star was exactly for this incoming class of directors who I really want to hit it out of the park and be terrific directors and a real asset to the boardroom.
So let's go out into the ethers right now and talk about the future. I'd say I want to go 10 to 20 years with this new movement of this diversity and this new movement of the boards. How do you think that is going to affect our working cultures in our companies and the things in the future? How is this new directorship that you're describing in your book going to affect the impact of boards around the world or around these companies, big companies?
Well, I see a change. I wouldn't necessarily say it's directly related to diversity, but I do see a big change. We're now into, say, the third decade of the 21st century. And over the last 2 decades, I've seen boards sort of make a shift from this country club mentality that, this old boys club, country club mentality that largely characterized the 20th century to being a real job. And I would say most directors today are very conscious about that watchdog role and asking those tough questions. Okay. But what we have in a lot of boardrooms is what I call a reporting out type of mentality, right? So management comes to the board and says, okay, here's what we want to do. We're going to lay out what we want to do. Here's our rationale for doing it. Any questions? And then the board fires off some questions, but management is kind of defensive. Like, to management, victory is getting out of the room unscathed by the board. So, right? So it sets up this very defensive dynamic, as opposed to, you've gone to the effort to recruit all of these smart people, diverse people, people with relevant skills, and you're not really leveraging that and capitalizing on that. So I think that's the shift we're certainly going to see in the next 10 years, which is that the role of the board shifts even further to being both that watchdog and that sounding board role, where you're really harnessing the talent that you've got in the boardroom and making the most of that, because that to me is a corporate asset. And you want to harvest that because that benefits the company, it benefits the organization. Now, I think with the COVID, most boards, when any organization faces a crisis, the board tends not to stand back and do reporting out. They tend to get very engaged. They even kind of micromanage a little bit. And for many companies, COVID was an emergency. They had problems with their credit lines. They had a lot of issues. And so we saw boards get much more heavily engaged, all hands on deck, to try to steer these companies and organizations through this crisis. And that, I think, is going to push back a little bit, which it should, because that's like an emergency, right? But I think it's going to push us a little closer to the board having a bit more of that sounding board role, as well as just that reporting out watchdog role. And I think that's kind of where we're going, which makes the most of all of our boardroom talent, which I think is not utilized to the extent that it should be right now.
These things that you're talking about right now, to me, when we start going into the future, one of the things that I want to talk about is, because you mentioned COVID, and I thought, what if a board has to pivot right in the moment? I'm not sure what would make it pivot, but I think the airline industry was a big example when we grounded all the planes, which, that and travel just wasn't even moving, and all these grounded planes, and the board suddenly had to pivot. Can we name maybe 3 things or 2 things or anything that you think would make a good board member in a moment like now? Because the uncertainty of things and the certainty of things, you just don't know what you don't know. We could have a regulation come in and change an industry on a dime. We can have a pandemic come in and change it on a dime. What are key personality traits that you want to look for in your board members that you think will help you make decisions based on unforeseen circumstances?
Well, I mean, some of what we're facing right now with the pandemic is unprecedented, but certainly boards have, had to weather a lot of challenges in the past. I mean, Lehman Brothers melting down. We're looking at what's going on with Evergrande right now. We don't know how much in China. Is that going to ripple globally like Lehman?
I wanted to bring that up earlier. I am enjoying this conversation so much.
Right? So, I mean, it's not like we've never seen boards and companies face crises before. We have. So I think one thing that you might want to think about in recruiting directors, have they been in a role in an organization, be that a boardroom role or be that a senior executive role, where they've had to grapple with and pivot, because if they have, they're not going to freak out when this happens. And that's what you don't want is, oh my God, we've never seen this before. You need cool heads in your board table when you're facing a crisis. I mean,
and that's a big key right there. You need cool heads on your board when you're facing a crisis.
And I think if somebody's been through a crisis before and come out the other side, they're less fussed about it because they've seen the movie. And so, okay. Whereas someone who, has come out of an organization that it's been pretty steady state, and suddenly they're in a board of a company that's facing a real, crisis, whatever it is, they're more likely to panic. And I think when you panic, that's when you make bad decisions. I think the other thing, I am a huge fan of boards being much more comprehensive on emergency succession planning than most boards are. We used to have a joke. Yeah, we used to have a joke. Well, think about it. If you suddenly lose your CEO, that's a pretty big, hit to the organization. And that can be a nonprofit. It can be a for-profit company, what have you.
It can be anything.
Absolutely. And so that's a huge risk. And that is totally the board's responsibility. It is not the CEO's responsibility. It's the board's responsibility. So we used to have a joke that would go around New York in, I would say, like the early 2000s about this elderly CEO who I think he was almost 80 or in his 80s, and his board wanted to talk about emergency succession planning. And he told the board, oh, if anything happens to me, my butler has a sealed envelope with the name of the person that I think.
Successor.
Yeah, okay. And so we make jokes. We make jokes about that now, right? You're laughing, I'm laughing.
Yeah, because I'm thinking Jamie Dimon and what was the CEO for Citigroup? He was
It wasn't him, okay? It was, and so it was the guy who used to run, it was Hank Greenberg who used to run AIG. Okay. And we make jokes, okay? Like what board would ever put up with that? But, the truth of the matter is when a lot of boards discuss emergency CEO succession planning right now, it's not much more than a name in an envelope. They say, oh, gee, if something happened to you, we'd just put in, Amanda, or we'd put in Greg, right? And I think it's really important to have a much more comprehensive discussion about, what you would do. Should it be someone from the executive team? Should it be someone from the board? What are the criteria for that? What are the risks? I was working with one company, and this is actually a very funny story. Their CEO was a biotech, lovely guy, and he was going to turn, I think, either 50 or 60. I can't remember. I think 60. And he was going to take his sons to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. Now, this is a guy who looked like his gym membership had expired about 20 years earlier. Okay. Now, because he was young, the board never really thought that much about it. And his first reaction was, oh, if anything were to happen to me, like the CFO can just step in. Well, we did a process where I actually interviewed everybody on the board in confidence, people in the senior team, this guy, and a whole lot of issues came bubbling out of that. First of all, they felt that it had to be somebody on the operating side because of what they told the shareholders about the business, that they wouldn't have credibility without doing that. And they said, secondly, we actually think there's going to be a hostile takeover for the company if anything actually happens to this guy. Wow. And they totally changed the plan. And so they made that a person that ran one division was going to be the COO. They made a board member who'd been involved in a hostile takeover scenario the interim CEO, right? Brilliant. Now, in the end, the guy came back from Kilimanjaro and everything was fine. but still, it was a great conversation. Exactly.
Yes, it was.
And the same goes with, risk oversight, I think has become such a huge issue on boards. And
absolutely,
looking at what some of these risks are and playing some of that out and talking that through with your management team. I mean, emergency CEO succession plan is only one, but there are several others. We're seeing now a lot of issues with supply chains.
I was just thinking that. That's really that unforeseen thing that nobody thought about, that pivot, that supply chain issue.
Yeah. So, those are the things, but I would say, and also you want people on the board with I would say an approach to innovation, that they're not afraid of experimentation and trying something new, because you're going to be faced with things that may not have appeared before. So, those who are uncomfortable not making decisions with 100% of information, you're going to be making decisions with about half the information sometimes you wish you had. So you need people that, have a degree of comfort with that, I think as well is quite important.
I think that's so interesting, because Xerox was really faced with that when they started not needing their document copiers. They had to really figure that piece out. I want to pop over here. MJ, thank you for this. Keyman Insurance will not replace the expertise nor the experience. That's really true.
That's a good
but
point.
They still have Keyman Insurance on me. And that's, I still think the Keyman Insurance is important, but it doesn't replace expertise or experience. You got it. And this, oh my God, we spend time discussing if parents pass, who gets the kids. It's so interesting. We do that, but we don't do that with our boards as well. Thank you for that. And I'm going to pop up here, and they better be prepared to move forward with risk oversight. There is so much interesting things right here, because I am looking at directors and things like that. And I think somehow, if we take a look at like Lee Iacocca, that was the guy I thought he is the, when it hits the fan, and you need to have that. And there is almost a type of personality for these people that are being asked to take over boards, a type of personality that might match not just the accumulation of experience and knowledge of the industry, but just a type of personality that says, I'm a builder on this board, and I'm better at builder. I'm I'm an emergency kind of CEO, et cetera, or I'm a branding CEO. This is, I think Oprah is more of a branding kind of board member. It's just that brand there. And then having these kinds of personalities, if you're going to be on a board, is there maybe a way to learn how, or be like a checklist that says, it would be great if you knew this and this and this, or improved on this and this and this, that would make you kind of that rock star board member? I know that you can watch the board, be on the board, etc. But is there like a list of skill sets per se that make strong board members that you're choosing?
Well, I
Depending
wouldn't
on the role they're playing.
I wouldn't necessarily say there's a checklist, but I wrote Becoming a Boardroom Star to really point out what some of the hallmarks of really outstanding directors, and not directors that were considered by their peers to be outstanding directors, because I've worked with roughly 200 boards now over the last 25 years, mostly S&P 1500s in different countries, Israel, Malaysia, Colombia. And what was interesting is when I sent the manuscript to people in those countries, they resonated to it just as much as people that were reading it in the United States and Canada. So I think it's sort of global, and it came from interviews. A lot of my work, I do what are called board evaluations. So this isn't some like check the box thing. I actually interview everybody on the board, everybody in the senior team. We look at where's the board really doing great and hitting it out of the park, and where could the board be even more effective, and what little changes do we need to make? So sometimes that's a recruitment thing. Sometimes that's a different way that in the materials people get, because they're overburdened with, 800 pages of garbage that no one really should have to be reading before a board meeting. So there's a lot of little things. And I think continuous improvement is really the hallmark of a great board, because that's what takes a board from good to great. That's what keeps a great board vibrant. And also, I do a lot of work in director evaluations, which is, it sort of started, the first time I did it was in '96, was the first one ever done by a major North American board. It was done by one of the big Canadian banks. I got to work on it. And this is where directors provide commentary about their fellow board members, those they think are real stars and really valuable and who they really respect and hold in high regard, and those that they think quite a bit less of, and why. And that's what Becoming a Boardroom Star is all about. So not only does it point out some of the hallmarks, and some of them, we've discussed, right? Relevance, work ethic, actually understanding the line between governance and management. That's another one. But there's also pitfalls that tend to detract from the high regard in which some board members are held. And I thought it was important to point some of those out as well.
God, this is so fascinating. And I definitely think everybody should pick up a copy of your book. If you're running a company right now and you have a board or you're an executive inside a board, and let's say they wanted to work with you or have you, how can they get a hold of you? What can they do if they decide they because right now I see the value, the asset value of having you come into a company and really evaluate the board, because the board is kind of the heartbeat, and you want the heart of your company to be healthy. You don't want it to have a heart attack, or if you don't want it, if there's something that happens to shake away. How can they work with you? Where can they get a hold of you at, and get to the point where they're talking with you?
Well, I would be happy to talk to any of your listeners that have issues about boards. So the best way to reach me is to go to my website. It's www.boardadvisor.net. It's .net, not .com, boardadvisor.net.
Will you
And
put that up, Robin, please?
And on there, you can easily, email me, and those emails come right into me. They don't go to staff; they come right to me. You can also download some white papers. We have a couple that are kind of interesting. One talks about boardroom champions versus preservationists in terms of chairs and board leaders. Another one talks about why boards micromanage and what you can do about it. So there's a lot of resources there. And we also have a workshop it's an online workshop that goes with becoming a Boardroom Star.
Nice.
And, so if you really like the book and you want to do a little bit more with that, and if you put in the code at checkout, which is workshop 20, that will give you 25% off the workshop price and take it down to, I think.
Put the code in, Robin.
I think it takes it down to 149 and there is a video, online video workshop that matches each chapter of the book. So
thank you so much. I want to do one last question. When a board has become dysfunctional,
yeah,
what can they do right now if you're bored? Because and I want to let you know before she answers the question, the workshop 20 for the discount code,
workshop 25
workshop 25, never mind, we're taking that down. Put up workshop 25 so that you get the discount for the program that's there.
Yeah.
So now let's say your board is
dysfunctional.
We'll use that word, dysfunctional. And you're on that board and you're thinking, holy smoke, if we don't do something, we're going to really go belly up, or it's not going to be good. What can they do outside of, things first, let's get an expert in there. Go get that book, read that book, go to her website, get a hold of her and say, oh my God, I need your help. And let's start with that. But outside of that, what else can they do if it's a dysfunctional board?
So, it kind of depends the role that you play on the board in a way. If you're just a director on the board, okay, and you look around and you're not comfortable with the decisions that are being made and things like that, I would get off that board because that exposes you. I think your listener was saying earlier, there is not only a potential legal liability, financial liability, even with directors and officers liability insurance, it's really reputational damage.
Absolutely.
You look at the people. I mean, I'm actually friends with someone who was on the board of Enron, and you never live that down.
Never.
So if you really think that that's what you've got, then you have to look carefully at whether you want to even continue serving on that board. Now, let's say it's not that bad, but there's clearly some things that are off. If you're in a leadership role, and I'm going to call it three really leadership roles. One is the chair of the board. The second is the chair of the nominating and governance committee, because that is the role that's responsible really for board policies and really for the effectiveness of the board as a committee. And the other, quite frankly, is the chief executive officer or the executive director. They may be the leader of the organization, but they also are clearly a leader, and they're typically a member of the board. Now, if you're a champion and you're in one of those roles, then you have an opportunity to find a way to get some of these issues out onto the table. So when I do board evaluations, what they are, they're not a report card. They're really a team building exercise for the board, and they're a platform to have good discussions about tough issues. So that's, a vehicle, and a lot of boards still use kind of a score sheet or a survey form. It's a compliance vehicle, but if you change the design of that, you can use it as a way to get after some of these issues and really have some dynamic and important discussions with your board. So I'll give you an example, just if we have a minute. Yeah. I was working with a guy, he was a new CEO of a regional bank up in the northeastern US. And when they hired him, he did not want to take the company public. And there was a certain way in which it was mutual. And there was a certain way in which he wanted it to grow. And he said this all through his interviews to be CEO. He was hired. And then he found out that half the board supported his view and the other half strongly opposed it.
Wow, that's hard. That's really hard.
This was really hard. So what we did is he was getting ready to have a strategy offsite with his board, and he realized he had all these problems. He also realized that his predecessor, who the board had fired, hadn't really educated the board that much about shifts in the demographics of the community, shifts in banking regulation. And so what we did is we interviewed everybody on the board about a whole range of issues about strategy. And we found out that there were a lot of knowledge gaps, particularly the people that wanted to go in a different direction. And when he found that out, he was able to fill that. And the board understood, why did half the board think this? Why did the other half think that? But it allowed them to have a really constructive discussion and come to a really good decision as a group that they were all pretty much aligned behind, whereas that board was completely dysfunctional when he inherited it.
Wow. Yeah. That is a big difference. I got to say, this has been such an interesting conversation. And you go and get her book right now. Do me a favor, hold your book up one more time for me.
Sure.
Just hold that book up right there. Becoming a Boardroom Star. Becoming a Boardroom Star. Let me tell you something. I think this book is so important for anyone on an executive board because you're shaping the future. You're not just directing your company.
Yeah.
Right now, you're shaping the future, shaping the culture. And if you're a true leader, this is the breakthrough book that you can read right now. If you are looking to improve your board, empower your board, you can get to Beverly and have her do a strategy call with you guys. And I'm going to put this up right now. I just want us to just say right here, this is boardadvisor.net, boardadvisor.net. That's where you want to go. And if you're driving, it's up on the thread so you can see it. Her book, go get your copy of her book right now. I know I am as soon as I'm done with this, just because I'm so fascinated with the conversation today. And I usually get the book first, and I've already read it by the time the interview is here. This is probably out of 600 interviews or so, the first one I haven't read the book for yet. Now I'm just like, oh, I can't wait to read it. Yes. And this I think is powerful. Great show. Thanks for sharing, Beverly. Very important information. Success in the future requires that you work together and be this new form of directing on this board. It has been a powerful conversation. And I just want to thank you for being here with us. It was super fun.
Well, thank you, Vickie. It was fun for me. And thank you to your listeners. It was a real honor for you to have me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So let me tell you something. This is the Coffee Break Show. Next week, we're going to have a really empowering guest just like Beverly. Go get your book today. You guys have a great day. And I want to let you know there's only one thing left to do, and that's listen to the music. I'll see you guys later.